We were desperate to be the girl who dies, always, eager to show how dolefully we danced, how prettily we perished in every ballet, at every audition. In every room was a chance to have our graceful suffering acknowledged. Today was no exception. The clock ticked toward auditions for Giselle, and the hallway air was thick with desperation, with hunger. Pale ballerinas swarmed the studio windows, elbowing each other to get a better look at the demonstrating soloists, the judges, the board of directors, and our instructors. People who held our futures in their frowns got acquainted with the teachers who had watched us both soar and plummet for 8 years straight, 6 of which I spent at the top of my class. They always told us what dancing meant, sharing a part of yourself with your audience. Well, now we were ready to give them everything within us. Once we crossed that threshold, none of us would come out whole. That's a quote from I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jamison Shea. This is YA Book Chat, and I'm your host, Leah Stuhler. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of YA Book Chat. As always, thank you so much for being here and for continuing to listen and supporting the podcast. Today, we are going to be chatting about a brand new book. It is actually not even published yet. It will be published on August 29th, and it is called I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me. And this is written by Jamison Shea. And I am very excited to let you all know that Jamison is here with me on the podcast today to chat about this fantastic book. Jamison is originally from Western New York and now lives in Finland. They have been a flautist, violinist, anthropologist, linguist, choreographer, dancer, digital producer, account executive, and a professional fire alarm puller. But according to their bio, they have also always been a writer. So, I am very excited to have Jamison here with us today. Welcome to the podcast, Jamison. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. This is so exciting. Thank you for having me.
Of course, you're
I
welcome.
don't do podcasts very often, so I'm very excited.
Oh, good. I feel very privileged then too.
Lovely. I am sorry for the mouthful, the list of the many things that my many titles.
No, don't apologize at all. I actually love it. I think it's one of the most interesting bios that I have ever read, because there's so much that you've done. And I love that. I do a bunch of things here and there as well, but not as much as that. So tell me a little about yourself and maybe some of those things and how they all came about.
So I am a firm believer in astrology, and I have a Sagittarius sun. And so Sagittarians are stereotypically, they like variety, like they like to try a lot of things, pursue a lot of experiences. It's like the enjoyment of learning. And I really, really do. I like variety. I like to try new things and new experiences and go new places, like pack up everything and move to Finland. And so, yeah, I started with learning flute, and then I wanted to do something else. And so I added viola. I also did some guitar, but I'm so bad that I didn't want to mention. And then in school, I liked learning a bunch of different languages. And so that is kind of how I built a background, I suppose, in linguistics, is simply because I refused to focus on one. And in terms of jobs, I would just kind of go wherever my interests led me. And yeah, now I'm here.
Well, that's great. I love that though. It's you're very well-rounded and eclectic. You've got a lot going on, so you've had a lot of experiences, and I think that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
It also says in your bio that you've always been a writer though. So have you been writing since you were young and kind of always, did you know you wanted to be a writer, or is this just kind of something you're like, I'm going to try this now?
Yeah, I've been writing since I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. And so it's always been something, and it's always been horror or close to horror, dark fantasy. I was obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe, of course. And so that was always my comfort zone of writing. And yeah, basically whenever it came to career day, I was supposed to be an astronomer by day and a vampire / author by night. And so that was always the game plan. And I didn't have a timeline when I wanted to be published, when I would pursue publishing, but I knew it would happen eventually after the vampire thing, which, life happens.
I mean, we can't all be vampires, even if we want to be, but it's fine.
Right.
Very cool. Well, I Feed Her to the Beast and The Beast Is Me is your debut novel. So that's very exciting. Tell me what this process has been like for you, especially because, you're in Finland, a totally different country from where your publisher is. So what has this process been like?
It's been a whirlwind. I think because I was in Finland, and my agent is in San Francisco, which is where I moved from. So I ended up getting an agent from San Francisco after I left San Francisco. But I expected things to move a lot slower, and I had mentally prepared for things to take more time. And so it was a whirlwind of, number one, trying to understand publishing and navigate publishing and being excited because I was going to have a debut come out. My book is happening. And on the other hand, I'm trying to understand, how are you an author in Finland? I'm not Finnish. My partner isn't Finnish either. And so I'm trying to navigate the Finnish tax system and social security system and self-employment insurance as a resident here who only speaks a little bit of Finnish and still learning, and then also trying to explain to people what an author in the US is like, because there's a union here, but they don't do anything with the amount of money that US publishing does. And so when I try to explain it to a bank, it sounds like a scam. All of it sounds like a pyramid scheme, and it's just, I'm telling the truth, I swear.
I hadn't even thought about that. Wow. That's really
every time I get any kind of payment from my publisher or anything like that, my bank thinks it's money laundering. And so there's a lot of paperwork involved every single time.
That's so crazy. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. I never thought about the differences and, payment from one country to another for even, the same
Me neither.
field.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I didn't even think about it. And I thought because I'm a US citizen, maybe it'll be a little bit more lax, because of course if there's any country where I receive foreign payments, it's the country that I'm from. But nope, didn't even matter.
Okay. Well, hopefully you'll be able to kind of get that all figured out. Maybe after so many paychecks, they'll finally figure it out. I don't know.
But I mean, I also appreciate that here in Finland, no one really pays attention very much to publishing at all, or YA horror. And so it's still nice that no one knows who I am here. I can go to a coffee shop and not be afraid of do these people know about my book?
Or travel hours on a train to go to a concert. I saw your post about that when you did that, and I was like, wow, that looks like quite a fun adventure.
Yes, it was my first kind of spur of the moment trip here, and it was lovely. The train tickets were pretty cheap. It was only about $20 one way. And it doesn't get very dark in the summer. And so me staying out the whole night and waiting for the morning train. It's not too dark. I can go sit in a park and it doesn't feel like nighttime, even though it's 3 a.m.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's helpful then, because I definitely wouldn't want to do that here where it's, pitch black at 3 a.m. So I would not feel very safe. But
yeah, I told my mom was freaking out the whole time. And I'm like, no, it's different here. It's different. It's okay.
Well, obviously you just mentioned, the challenges with banking. But, what else do you feel like maybe has been the most challenging part of publishing your first novel? And then also on the other side of that, what's been the most fun or most exciting part of it?
Yeah. So I would say the most challenging part for me as an author is definitely, I think people think I know more than I do now. I think there's an assumption that because my book is going to come out, that I'm going to be a published author, that like I'm a pro and like I am like the epitome of professional, and a master of my craft. And what I have come to learn as I've started to meet more authors in this process is that a lot of us are just winging it. A lot of authors also have like day jobs, so they're not even full-time authors, and so they're winging it for 50% of their time while they're like outside of their main jobs, which is definitely comforting, because I felt like I had to know everything and I had to have all the best answers, but no, we're just making it up as we go on.
I think most of us do that in our everyday lives.
Precisely. And I'm quick on my feet, so at least I can handle that. And I would say the most exciting thing is I really didn't expect as much excitement and enthusiasm for Beast. When I started it, it was just a fun experiment for myself. It was just like a little writing exercise. And so the warm reception from other people for what to me was just like a silly, fun idea for myself is always, it's always nice to hear that it isn't just me making it up, that there's other enthusiasm by people I'm not paying.
Well, it's definitely it's a fantastic storyline, and it's a great novel. I have never read anything like it before, and I've read like YA horror books and villain origin stories, but I have never read anything like this one. Like I absolutely loved it. I was totally creeped out and horrified by it at the same time. But I mean,
Yeah.
it was great, and I read the ebook. And then today you posted a clip of the audiobook, and I was like, whoa, I thought
I
I got
know.
creeped out. Like people listening who are going to listen to the audiobook are just going to freak out because that
Yeah.
narrator is fantastic.
When I got to pick the narrator, I know this is not a privilege that a lot of authors get, but I received the auditions and they asked me which one was my favorite. And when I heard that voice, I was like, oh, this is it. This is the winner.
I can
It
see
was just
why.
so disturbing. And I'm like, yeah, this is the one.
And if your book is a villain origin story, you need a
Mhm.
disturbing, creepy voice like that. So
Precisely. You need to feel as unsettled as it is on the page.
yeah.
And I think it does such a great job. Even for me, I was shivering the first time I heard it.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you passionate about writing or just love the arts? Tune in to the Poetry Podcast with A. Discover the latest trends in the industry, enjoy insightful book reviews, participate in Q&As, listen to captivating poetry readings, and get inspired by author interviews. We release episodes on the first 3 Thursdays of each month. Don't miss out. Come check us out at the Poetry Podcast with A.
Well, why don't you tell everybody what I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me is all about?
Sure. So it's about a ballerina, Laure. She is the only Black ballerina at an elite academy in Paris. And when she finds out that just being at the top of her class may not be enough to get her an apprenticeship at the premier ballet house in France, she decides to take matters into her own hands and befriends an eldritch horror, so that she cannot be denied. She'll be undeniable no matter the stakes. And then people start dying, and the more she leans into her monstrous new abilities, the more like a monster she becomes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's great. It's being called like a cross between the movie Black Swan and the book House of Hollow. And I can
Mhm.
totally see that from both perspectives and both sides. We've got like the very cutthroat world of ballet, and then this whole other like secret kind of underground world where the River of Blood is, where she gets her power from. So tell me what inspired this story and kind of how the idea for this story came about and developed.
Yeah, so I really love contrasts. I love books that have extremes, like on a spectrum. And so I knew I wanted to write a story about a character who becomes a monster and likes it. That was the end goal. And so my thought was, if they end up as a monster, as something that is horrifying and unrefined and a little feral and kind of ugly and dark in ways, then they should start from the exact opposite. And so I was thinking, okay, what's refined, what's beautiful, what's polished, what's graceful? And immediately I thought of a ballerina. The irony being that there's so much body horror baked into just ballet in real life that there was a lot of material to work with just with this little example. And it's set in Paris. I know the city really well, and lucky for me, there's so much creepy, gruesome things in such a bright little twinkling city that it really, the horror writes itself.
I've never been there. And I've only ever like seen when you see pictures and videos and movies about Paris, they only show you all the like pretty stuff, So
of course.
I did not know about all the creepy horror,
like the Catacombs.
Yeah.
That was actually my partner, our first time in Paris together. We went on a date into the Catacombs.
Wow.
So that was like my first date in Paris, was underneath the city surrounded by bones.
Awesome. That is quite a first date.
Yeah. But yeah, so it was already like built in to have this creepy environment that I could use for the story.
Yeah, that's really cool. And, in the story, so we see how there are certain institutions that profit on exclusion. So like you said, Laure is a very talented ballerina. She's been at the top of her class for years, and she does everything she's supposed to. She is so completely dedicated to her craft, but she can't seem to get really noticed enough by the directors to get promoted and to get what she wants. And, it's something that we see not only in the world of ballet, but in other kind of artistic fields too. I've experienced that, when I was an actor. Like there's always something that's wrong, right? Like you get excluded because you weigh too much or weigh too little, because you're not tall enough or too tall, because of the color of your hair, the color of your skin, like too many freckles, your teeth need to be brighter, your hips aren't, like there's always something like that is wrong. It's very frustrating. From the artist perspective, like I got passed over for the lead role of something because I had brown hair and not blonde hair. And I was very frustrated. I'm like, there are wigs, right? Like I could wear a wig. So, so like this happens all the time. But then, we see too that there's the fact that, maybe you do become successfand but you're really easily replaced. Like one wrong move, something happens and you can get one little injury and, you get replaced. And so we have, young adults like Laure who are really pushing themselves to kind of fit into this world and who are like blindly devoted to something that really will never love them back. Talk to me about, your experience with this, if you experienced this when you were dancing, why it was important for you to kind of bring this whole thing to light, because this is a really big deal.
Sure. So I have a story that tends to creep people out, and I love telling it. So it's not about dance, it's actually about classical music. I am a classical flautist, and in the orchestra that I was in, I was trying really, really hard. I was competitive against the other flautists. And they all it was at a private school. And so all of my classmates went to, like, they had private tutors and they had very expensive instruments. And what I didn't realize at the time is that the quality of your instrument really does impact how great you sound. And so if you can afford a more expensive instrument, then you sound better. generally. You still have to actually like try and apply skill, but the quality of your instrument is kind of like a boost. But I worked really hard. I practiced constantly during the summer, like during the breaks, I would practice for hours every single day. And when it came to auditions, I finally succeeded, and I was first flute, first chair, which is the highest standard. It says that you are the most skilled. And in theory, when you get solos, when any solos come up in the music, it goes to the most skilled, the first chair, first flute. And at some point I had an oral surgery. I had to get my wisdom teeth out, and I had a concert coming up, and I wanted to prove that I deserved to be first chair, first flute, first chair. And so I actually tore the stitches in my mouth, because you have to put your jaw a certain way, and I just had the surgery, and so they hadn't dissolved or whatever yet. So I tore the stitches in my mouth so that I could still perform, to show how dedicated I was. I could feel the string dangling in the back of my gums the whole time. It was terrible. But then they gave the solo to second place because she was sad. And I'm like, she lost. Maybe if she practiced more, she would have been first chair, but she wasn't. And I know this because I heard her play. And so I think that was the first time where I was surprised that skill alone wasn't enough. Just because you practice, just because you try hard enough, it doesn't mean that you will get the accolades that in theory you're promised. Sometimes people pick their friends, or they pick people that they identify with more. Sometimes they just have favorites in mind, and it doesn't really matter in the end because it isn't always fair. Just because you are dedicated, it isn't always going to be recognized. And I remember being so frustrated because I was like, what do I have to do? Like, what divine power do I need to get people to recognize my skill and reward me effectively? And so this book is kind of exploring that of, let's say you do throw in some divine power. Is that going to be enough? We'll see.
Yeah. And it is so true. Like sometimes it's just like, no matter what you do, no matter how good you are, like there's always somebody better, or they're going to get picked, like you said, for a reason that doesn't even matter or doesn't go along with how talented you are, and that is especially frustrating for artists, like
especially like when you're trying to put the art and the product forward, or like whatever the performance is, and you see that the art is suffering. And so what is the point? You love it more than other things, and even that suffers.
Yeah. And it's hard. And, kind of along with that, then we have this question of, well, how far am I willing to go in order to achieve my dream? What am I going to do in order to push myself and to prove myself and get what I feel like I deserve because I have this talent? And, and we see that in the book, not just with Laure, but with her roommate and her other classmates too. And they make these very deliberate choices to further their career, but there are costs to them. Like you said, Laure, it's her villain origin story. So she's like becoming a monster. So talk to me about, developing her character and kind of pushing the limits on what she was willing to do in order to gain power and achieve her goals.
So, as you know, Laure is very intense. And so I had to make a character who would make very intense, unhinged decisions. Beyond self-preservation was the thing. Someone who is willing to go into the catacombs and pledge themselves to a river of blood is not a normal person.
No.
That's not normal decision making. And so I really had to come up with a character who does go to extremes in every situation and also doesn't have anything to lose. Because again, if some girl came up to you and said, hey, want to follow me down underground? There's a talking river of blood. You would probably be like, no, I have things to do. I have a life, I have friends, I have family. And so I really had to take all of those objections away from Laure so that desperation was so much louder. than anything else, which it took a lot. It took a lot for me to suspend disbelief.
But it works. It's very clear reading it, why she does that. Because as you said, somebody comes up to you and they're like, hey, follow me down here underneath Paris to the creepy place where all these bones are. And I'm going to show you something magical that'll give you power. I mean, you're not going to want to do that. Right. But
Yeah.
I think it helps Laure with that it is Josephine who's the one
Her
who's
idol.
taking her down there. Yeah, exactly. Because if my idol, like if Sutton Foster, if I met Sutton Foster and she was like, Leah, if you come with me, I will show you this great thing that will help your acting career go to the top, I would gladly say yes to that. You know what I mean? Because she's Sutton Foster and I love her and admire her. So so for Laure, it makes sense and it works really well because it's Josephine and, she's like, oh, this person is paying attention to me and I didn't even know that she knew who I was. So it works well.
Thank you. I tried to lower all of her defenses so that it seemed like the next logical step, of course.
Yeah. It also helps too, I think, that there are a couple of other people who she discovers have done this as well. And one of them happens to be pretty attractive to her. So also a good draw when you've got somebody there who's like, ooh, who is that? The attraction helps too.
It makes it easy to come back and not be as freaked out the second, third, fourth time that you do it.
Yeah. Let's kind of talk about the other side of this story. All right. So Laure's desperation to climb the ranks, and gain power leads her to follow Josephine's steps into Archeron's world, Elysium. So it's this whole other world that is underneath Paris in the catacombs. And, the River of Blood is down there. But you go past that river a little bit and we get this other door that leads to Elysium. And, the River of Blood flows through there. There's kind of like a forest. There's this cottage that Laure and the others can stay there and sleep there if they want and, relax there. And we discover that there's also one of them has created this garden. I don't want to say too much about it to spoil things, but it's a very unique and special garden.
Yes.
So, and this place kind of becomes like a sanctuary for Laure and Josephine and a couple others who are down there. So talk to me about building this part of the world and how it developed as you were writing the book.
Yeah. So as I was writing the book, Laure needed a normal place to be. She needed a safe place and a world where she could realize that you don't have to be fighting for your life 24/7. And so I wanted something, because I was playing again with the extremes where she spends her day at the Paris Ballet. She is at Palais Garnier, which is literally covered in gold and marble, and there's light constantly. I wanted something that was the exact opposite, something that was dark, that was gritty, especially the opera house that it's set in is a tourist trap. And so it's constantly crowded with tourists, and it's also an architectural marvel. It's artistic, whatever. So it's constantly people around. It's loud, it's bright, it's expensive, it's almost too much. And so when I'm thinking of a place that is dark and gritty and wild, as opposed to the center of a city, I just leaned into those opposites. So instead of a palace, there's a tiny little cottage. And instead of the Seine, it kind of looks black most of the days when you look at the river, there's a river of blood and it's kind of glowing and whatever. And then, of course, the people, instead of being cutthroat dancers at a ballet company, it's normal people who are you can relax, you can calm down here, you were not in danger. Other than that, I was just kind of winging it with the imagery. I was just kind of riffing off myself of oh, it would be so cool if the river talked and just kind of adding on top of it.
I do love the fact that the river talks. It's fantastic. And when she at one point goes into the river, I was
Mhm.
like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, being like in a river of blood and being covered blood, that's like totally nasty and gross. I'm like,
Yeah.
how would I react if that were me? But like she gets what she wants out of it, so it works,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I mean,
She'll take a shower. It's fine.
it's fine. And I love that she has this place to go to also because even, for a lot of people or characters in books, they might see like their home as a sanctuary, but for Laure,
Mhm.
her apartment with her roommate is kind of a toxic environment as well because her
Yeah.
roommate is dealing with her own things and pressures from her mother, and it's not a good situation. So, you
Yeah,
know,
it's definitely Laura is part of the reason that she's so isolated is that she is sharing an apartment that is owned by her best friend's family. And so if their relationship fragments, she's got to move. And she
right.
can't just like squat there. And
Oh,
so yeah, she needed somewhere that doesn't require rent payment.
yes. And the cottage there is perfect. And this is where, for everybody listening, if you haven't, I was talking about House of Hollow earlier. This is where that
Yeah.
comparison comes in. And if you haven't read House of Hollow and you are a horror fan, also you should read that book as well because very good.
You
But how,
absolutely must. It is a
yeah,
favorite of mine.
House of Hollow has this alternate world like Elysium, where it's like this underground, kind of place in contrast to the real world up above. And it's very cool. So that's what Elysium is. It's a little bit more, I feel like your world here is a little bit more pleasant than the underworld in House of Hollow. Still creepy,
Yeah.
of course, but
House of Hollow is that place was disturbing. I would not go there.
mm-mm, mm-mm.
Not at all.
I feel like with that book, I mean, I loved it and I would definitely read it again, but I need to wait till it's like October and Halloween or something. Like it's not when
Yeah.
I have to be in a good mind frame for
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
In thinking about this too, like there's so much very detailed information about the ballet and the world that Laura is in. And I was
Mhm.
wondering, because it did say in your bio that you were a dancer and choreographer for a bit. So I didn't know, how much experience you had in that, or if you had to do a lot of research kind of around this, because
Mhm.
it's very, very detailed with the shoes and like even her using the dental floss to tie her laces on instead of, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, that's really cool. Like, do they really do that? I didn't know about that. So,
Yeah. So I am not a ballerina. I'm not a classically trained, like I'm not ballerina at all. The dancing that I did was like hip hop, same with choreography. I have had an interest in ballet, and also because of my background in classical music, I'm familiar with just a lot of ballets because I would play the music. But for the actual like details of ballet, the dancing, the body horror, and also just details about building the shoes and things, I did a lot of research. It was a combination of interviews and documentaries with dancers in France and also at the American Ballet Theater. I followed so many videos. I watched tutorials that there's a lot of ballet like influencers, I guess you can say, who show like how they customize their shoes. And so like I watched them and I noticed that there's probably more, but there's one in particular who uses dental floss because she feels like it holds better than normal thread. But yeah, those kinds of details, I've consumed nothing but ballet media for months to make sure that I could really like parse out everything. I
yeah,
don't
because
think I'll ever escape.
it'll probably stick with you forever now.
Oh yeah.
Especially as you continue on, writing in this world, because
Yeah.
it seems like from the ending that there will be more. Is there going to be a sequel?
Yes, it is a duology. So it is a different villain. So the story that gets wrapped up in book one is wrapped up, it's done. But there are some loose threads that get dealt with in book two with a new villain and chaos ensuing and more destruction and despair.
Ooh, I'm very excited about it, especially because you said somebody else is the villain. So now Now I'm going
Yeah.
to be thinking about this a lot and like who it is and how this is going to go. So very exciting. Okay.
Yes.
You know, it was kind of funny when I was reading this. Okay. And this shows you like, so I used to dance, but I was never a ballerina
Hmm.
either. Like,
Yeah.
but but I was around friends and people who were, but growing up in the 90s, like my exposure to this kind of thing was the movie Center Stage. Did you ever see that movie?
I think I saw clips of it in research. Yeah.
Okay. So, I was like, and that's like it's very like, it is competitive for them too, but it's in a different way. And that is at the
Yeah.
American Ballet
Ballet
Company,
theater.
the
Yeah.
theater. Yeah. And, but this is like, but your book was like on such, it's like that, but like on steroids, but I loved it. Like, it's so, I was like, oh, it takes each, like, what if Blondie had become a villain instead, like I don't remember her
Yeah.
character's name, but yeah, so it was really cool. I have a question. So because, so Laure asks,
Hmm.
the river of blood is like, what do you want? And she tells it what she wants and kind of makes a bargain with it, because we all know like magic always comes with a price. It's never
Of
free.
course.
So there has to be a price there. I was just curious. Okay, if you lived in this world,
Hmm.
what bargain would you make with Archeron, our river of blood?
So I would like, just like in general, with any kind of power, I would love the ability to slow down and speed up time. Because like when I'm reading a book, I want to pause time so that people will leave me alone long enough to finish, you know? But
Mm-hmm.
when I'm on a plane and I'm flying back to the US, I want to speed it up because that's 9, 10 hours. Come on. That would be my preferred like power, but I don't know what I would give. I'm pretty content with my life. I'm not really, I don't want to give anything away.
That makes sense. That's a good ask. As a teacher,
Yeah.
like I would definitely love that ability to slow time so I could make my summer last a lot longer than it does. I am not prepared to go back to school, but it's
That's
here.
fair.
So I totally get that. Although I would probably, as much as I would love that, I would probably actually
Hmm.
ask for the ability to teleport places so that like,
Ooh,
because I
that
love,
bypasses the plane problem.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And money issues with flying and
Yeah.
whatnot, right? Like, because I would love to travel to other countries. I've been to Europe, but I want to be able to go back, but it's so expensive that I'm like on a like a 5 year
Yeah,
plan here to save money to be able to go where we want. But if I could,
precisely. And you can just blink and you're somewhere else, all done.
that would be
Yeah.
fantastic. So, but the same, I'm not sure what I would give up, what I would bargain with. It's
Yeah, I
tricky.
think that's the hard thing because yeah,
Yeah.
Laura wagers something unhinged, but like
Hmm.
I'm not that dedicated to slowing down time or teleporting.
You're probably also not as unhinged as she is either.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I
there's
was
that.
I was answering a Q and A, and it was what advice would you give Laura if you were there? And like my advice was just touch grass. She just really needs to take a chill pill just a little bit.
Just a little. Well, this is such a fantastic book. Like I said, it's a very unique
Thank
storyline.
you.
I absolutely loved it. And for all of you listening, if you like horror and villain origin stories, like you have got to read this book. It comes out in a week, August 29th. And so you guys need to go and run and pick up this book. And if you really want to be creeped out, I suggest the audiobook because y'all,
Oh yeah,
I mean, tiny little snippet and I was like, "Oh my gosh." So,
it is
I'm
so demonic.
like I'm gonna get the audiobook. Like I have, the ebook of this, but I need to get the audiobook because I need to sometimes you just need like a good, like creepy, you want to be creeped out, like when you watch horror movies or whatever. So this is gonna be mine. I'm gonna get the audiobook so I can do that. Thank you so much, Jamison, for being here and chatting with me about
Thank
this book.
you.
It's been so
Thank
great.
you.
And I wish you the best. I am so excited for you when this comes out, and hope that it's all that you want it to be.
I mean, it's gearing up to look that way, so I'm very optimistic.
Awesome. Well,
All right.
thank you again for being here, and thank you
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will chat again soon. Today's episode featured the book I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jamison Shea. A special thank you to Jamison for coming on the podcast with me and chatting about their book. And a special thank you to Chantal Gersh at Macmillan Children's Publishing Group for setting up the interview. Be sure to check out YA Book Chat on Instagram and Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you get your episodes as soon as they are available. YA Book Chat was created by, is hosted and edited by me, Leah Stuhler.